Welcome to Michiana Main Lines. Today we're going to be talking about the east-west tracks on the south side of South Bend, two Norfolk Southern and one Conrail. This map isn't very accurate, but just kind of to get our bearings straight here, this is the south side of South Bend, and you see a bundle of lines running east-west through here. Kind of three lines mainly, at least as far as Walnut Street, and this kind of ran from S&S Junction eastward to Plymouth Junction, where it met the old north-south Pennsylvania. So we had a Norfolk Southern to the north and to the south, and a Conrail line in the middle. Here's a much better look at this now. That shows more detail of this line. This is a Conrail map. Pretty much, if you're middle-aged or older, you will remember three tracks that crossed South Olive Street. You see these three tracks here. The one in the middle was the Conrail line, which was actually called the SS&S connector running track. And then to the north and south, there were two NS lines, which were old NJI&I lines. So we'll kind of break this down here now. We're going to kind of look at this western part first and look at some pictures, and then we'll move on to the east. But we see this line here to the west join the old Nipsko or Kankakee branch of Conrail, of course, and then it moved eastward. Here was Mastic, where there was hopper car unloading, and I believe even some boxcar freight business back in the 80s. To the north, the steel warehouse had some steel business off of the Norfolk Southern, off of that northern line. To the south here, of course, NS came into town from the Lakeville Junction. And here we see the old roundhouse, the ethanol plant. This line to the south then went eastward. Just east of Olive Street was an interchange here between Conrail and Norfolk Southern, and that kind of was the only connection to these lines when Norfolk completely took over around 2000. But we'll kind of be zeroing in on this western part here now with some pictures. Here's our first picture. This is Olive Street and Indiana Court. That's that south line again where it kind of made the curve. This was a Norfolk Southern locomotive when the line was still being used. Just to the left here now is where the track ends, and there is a covered hopper unloading area there for a business now. Next we have a look at the center Conrail track. This again was Olive Street looking west. You kind of see something down the line there. I think it's the locomotive. Over to the left was the mastic and the covered hopper unloading area. To the right was steel warehouse and the Norfolk Southern line and the unloading of coil cars that was taking place there. Here's a close-up look at the mastic. This was the covered hopper unloading area, which I don't believe they do any hopper car unloading anymore. I think there's just boxcar unloading taking place at the company there now. Next up, here's a look at the northern Norfolk Southern line. You see the steel warehouse over to the right, and that's where coil cars would be spotted for unloading there. This was kind of the worst track of the three. Here it looks like it was being upgraded a little bit just to kind of shore it up, but it pretty much was kind of a sod line for a good many years as I remember it. Here's a look at the steel warehouse and the steel coil unloading, and that was still taking place at that time. This was pretty much in the 80s when these pictures were all taken. Next up here, this is looking east of Olive. This was the interchange Conrail had with Norfolk Southern. Here you see the Conrail switch engine in the interchange track area there, picking up and delivering some cars, and I believe they actually derailed at this point when the picture was taken, so things kind of came to a standstill. This picture is taken from the Conrail South Side chase video. So if you want to see more of this video in action, that's another video here on the channel. So be sure and check that out. Next up now, we're going to kind of zero in on the eastern part of this line, kind of taking up just to the east of Walnut Street, which Walnut Street would be right in here. And here now you can see where the Conrail line, there was actually two. This northern one was called the North Storage Lead, and that's what came into the Metal Resources scrap yard area, and then it also extended further eastward to the Tribune Warehouse. Tribune Warehouse would take box cars, and of course scrap cars came out of Metal Resources, and they had several sightings there. Off of this picture, but on the old, the last slide we showed the map, there also was an old NS line that went north all the way up across Sample Street into the old Oliver plant, but that wasn't being used at this time. You can see there was a lot of tracks here. There was even more tracks even going farther back, but this pretty much was the layout at this time. And then of course the Conrail line would continue eastward, crossing Prairie, Kimball, and Kendall Street, and then would go and join the north-south former Pennsylvania line. And there's a separate video on that if you want to see more information about the Pennsylvania line. Now as far as Norfolk goes, the line to the south here crossed over the Conrail, which that caused some confusion for some people, because then the Norfolk was just a single line on the north, and then Conrail was on the south. This Norfolk line came to the old Allied Products, later EWI complex, which was a pretty big site, 36-acre former Studebaker area that still took a lot of freight under Allied and EWI well into the 90s. So this was another big business area for Norfolk Southern, as well as the ethanol plant. Another interesting thing here is this curve coming through the Franklin, Indiana Avenue area is called the Marianne track on Conrail maps. I'm not exactly sure what the significance of that is, if that was some form of nickname, or I don't know if that means anything in railroad lingo. I really couldn't find anything, but that's what it's labeled as, so that's what we'll refer to it as also. So now we will move on. Here we see our first picture now. This is again that Norfolk Southern line, and that's the diamond where it crosses the Conrail line and then joins up with the northern Norfolk Southern line. You see to the left here the boxcars. That's the Tribune Warehouse where Conrail had some boxcars spotted. To the right would be Prairie Avenue. Next up, here's a shot of Norfolk Southern under Southern Line next to Edward Street. This is looking east toward Walnut Street. Here we see the train returning from its daily switching duties. Over to the left here would be the Conrail line, which was in the middle, and there was also the remnant of another NS track here. Another shot of Norfolk Southern, this time returning from Allied Products with some 86-foot boxcars and caboose. This picture is taken from the old Studebaker switch video, which is also available on this channel. So if you're interested in seeing more of that classic Norfolk Southern switching at the old Allied, be sure to check that out. We will be updating this video, well, not updating, but posting a copy of the video of the switch at Allied, and we're going to overlay it with some classic scanner chatter of the NS crew when they were switching at Allied, as well as doing other switching around this line on the south side. So we'll probably be putting that up here in the next several days. It's a pretty interesting audio, which is kind of Really interesting if you're into switching, especially just kind of listening to how the crews go about their business. Next up, here's a look at Candle Street Yard. This, of course, is the Allied complex over to the left, later EWI. There you see they did have a bit of a yard there with boxcar storage that Norfolk Southern maintained, and then several spurs going into the complex, of which they primarily boxcars and even some scrap metal gondolas came out of the plant as well. Here's an in-depth look at the track layout in the Allied stamping plant. You kind of see a big spur here, another spur here in the middle, a spur over to the left, and even a long spur up north here. This is labeled as Building 78. I believe some track work took place around this curve to smooth out that curve in order for the 86-foot boxcars to negotiate into the building. This area right here was the baler, and that's where gondola scrap cars would be generated. Sometimes they would be transferred over to Conrail. Sometimes Norfolk Southern would handle them to wherever they were going. I'm not sure exactly how many. I think one of these sidings here was also used for boxcars, and I think the other one was inactive, but I'm not sure which is which. Here's some looks inside of LI. This was taken around 1980. There we see some 86-foot boxcars positioned in the dock for stampings to be loaded, probably quarter panels from what it looks like there. Look at one of the other docks. Again, racks with material over to the left. Kind of dark. I apologize for the dark appearance, but that's the way it kind of was, dark and dingy, and the flash bulb at that time just wasn't good enough to really illuminate things. Here's a look at that track that was kind of refurbished around that curve going into Building 78. See a little bit to the right there of a warning "men will not clear" notice, indicating that crews should not hang off on the side of the car when they go around that curve. Of course, these buildings are all gone now, and this is now a new Ignition Park industrial park development area. And now here we come up to another shot. This is along Edward Street, and here we see the Conrail train that was working this area. Here we see a good assortment of cars they had. The bi-levels were headed for Chippewa, down on the south side of South Bend on the old Pennsylvania line, to be unloaded there. And you can just barely get a glimpse of a gondola or two in the middle, which were probably for the scrapyard, or either empties going in or loaded cars coming out. It's hard to say. Next shot here now. Here's another view now. This is of the Conrail North storage lead that is heading into the scrapyard spurs. So you kind of see that there, and this also is what went on farther east into the Tribune warehouse. You kind of see the boxcars in the far distance there, spotted at the Tribune warehouse. But here were the spurs going into the scrapyard. This track crossed here now. This was the north side Norfolk Southern line, which went down to a steel warehouse. So that didn't look like that was really being used much at this time. These photos were taken in about 2004, 2005, just before the simplification project that Norfolk Southern undertook to remove most of the track in this area and just clean things up following their buyout of Conrail. Next up, here's a look at the Conrail line heading east around the Candle Street Yard. You can just see how much activity there was at that time. I mean, that was a pretty decent sized yard there at Candle Street. Now, of course, that's all gone. But to the right, we see the Conrail line kind of meander heading toward the Marianne track and southeast to join the Old Pennsylvania back over in this area here. Now here we see the Marianne track, or the Conrail line crossing Indiana and Franklin Street, where the line went right through the middle of the intersection, doing a push move down to Chippewa to unload some bi-levels and possibly a boxcar or two for Hanson Cold Storage down at Ewing Avenue. Another shot here at the same intersection, this time caboose first, and there you get a good look at the bi-level with the what looks to be vans to be unloaded down at Chippewa. Just kind of bring this up. This is a little interesting thing from the 80s. This was a clip from the newspaper when Conrail was actually looking to abandon this entire line from KK Junction to Plymouth Junction. At that time, it was listed as Category 2. Cat 2 means that it's under study and may be the subject of a future abandonment. This really puzzled me back at that time, with there being what seemed like enough business on the line. And of course, this line still exists today under Norfolk Southern. But it just kind of goes to show you how the frenzy of the abandonments back in the 80s kind of put just about every secondary line under the microscope for abandonment. And I guess this line here was no exception. If a line wasn't earning its keep, it was moved up to the anticipated, and it was gotten rid of. Now I'll take a look at how things have changed now in 2022. Again, bringing up that same map from the west side here. Red kind of indicates what is still in service. That, of course, now is all Norfolk Southern, or NS, following the buyout of Conrail. But you see basically all the other trackage in black and dashed is pretty much gone. So, I mean, a lot of track here was lost, but there still is a lot of activity, and we'll kind of look at that a little bit later here coming up. The east side also fared the same way, with a lot of track removed. Still a lot of track in action yet, but basically everything east of Prairie Avenue, including the Marianne track, is all gone now. And of course the entire Allied complex, that is now a new modern industrial park development. So, I mean, no rail access of any kind available there now. Here's another look now. This is kind of an overhead view, just kind of showing that west end and the lines that are still in place here now. Some new activity. We'll kind of zero in on that a little bit here coming up. East end the same way, still shows in red the lines that are still active. The scrap yard, will kind of look a little bit more at that here coming up. This is kind of an interesting couple pictures here to look at. This was the S&S junction area before the NS buyout, and then to the right after. If we look here at the left, we kind of see how Norfolk Southern came in from the south out of Lakeville, and were separate from Conrail. They, of course, had their siding, which went to the ethanol plant area, which was their business, and then they had their track, which ran east and became the south line, which went over to Allied. Now, Conrail, they came in off of their old NIPSCO or Kankakee branch, and that went on a piece as a yard lead, and then they would get onto their main center track and go east and do their business. Well, following the the buyout, or married NS and CR as I call it, uh, they needed a more efficient way to connect these lines, because about all they could do was use the interchange. But what they did here, you can kind of see this new track that they put in connecting the NS to Conrail, and they kind of used what appears to be an old former NJ and I flyover thing. You see that here in the old photo, this scar of what used to be. That was an old NJI and I that kind of swung through. And what they did is kind of almost relayed that, but then they kind of made a little bit of a bulge here to connect with that main Conrail line. But this is what married everything together, because of course this is all NS now, following the buyout in around 2000. Here's another closer look at that new track that was put in. And then basically the old remnant of the Kankakee or NIPSCO line was done away with, and then they still connected to what's left of it, then going northeastward to Oliver's Yard. But you see the new connection in here with the bulge. Here's another look at the way things kind of look now on that west end. There's still a lot of business here now. You know, a railroad is not dead in this part of town at all. Of course, the ethanol plant complex, now labeled as Messer North America, and some new business that cropped up in later years. There's kind of an aggregate transfer operation with several sidings that was put in. And then the track dead ends by molding products, but that's where covered hoppers are still spotted now. And on the Conrail line, now this is labeled as KAK warehouse, and I believe boxcars are spotted there periodically, but no covered hopper unloading as far as I can tell. Looking at the east end of things now, we see the main business there right now is still the scrapyard. Spurs still going into there. So that is pretty much what's keeping this track alive east of Olive. They still have the spur at Tribune Warehouse, but I don't believe there's any freight being taken there at this point. And of course, then east of Prairie Avenue, this track is all gone here now, and of course, the whole Allied Products is long gone. MRC is now Omnisource. So I hope you have enjoyed this and maybe learned a few things, or at least got some entertainment out of it. If you did, like and subscribe. Even if you didn't, like and subscribe anyway, because that kind of at least gives us some encouragement to keep doing this and adding some new things. So again, thanks for watching. We'll see you later.